The Empire had conquered 17 star systems. They had never lost a war. They had never met a species that could stand against them. Their warriors were bred for battle over 10,000 generations. They were faster, stronger, and more deadly than any creature in the known galaxy. Among all their warriors, Princess N was the greatest. She had fought in over 300 ritual duels, and she had won every single one. Her body stood nearly 8 feet tall. Her skin was covered in blue scales that were harder than steel. She had 4 arms, each one strong enough to bend metal bars like soft clay. When she held her plasma blades, entire armies trembled. This was the empire that humanity stumbled upon when their ship entered space. The human vessel was called the Starward Hope. It was a diplomatic ship, not a warship. It carried scientists, translators, doctors, and ambassadors. They had come looking for trade and friendship. They had no idea what waited for them. Captain Danny Marsh stood on the bridge as the massive station appeared on their screens. He was 42 years old, a former Marine who had served in 2 wars back on Earth. He was not a tall man. He was not particularly strong. His hair was turning gray at the sides, and his hands had the rough skin of someone who had worked hard his whole life. But his brown eyes were calm and steady. They were the eyes of a man who had seen difficult things and survived them. "That station is the size of a small moon," said Lieutenant Amy Cole from her position at the sensors. She was young, barely 30, with sharp eyes and quick hands. "I'm reading thousands of life signs." "They certainly like to build big," said Ben, the communications officer. He was a thin man with nervous habits, but he was the best translator they had. "Captain, we're being hailed." The main screen flickered and appeared. Danny had seen images of them in the first contact files, but seeing one in real time was different. The alien was massive, with blue scales and 4 arms folded across its broad chest. Its eyes were yellow with black slits, like a snake. "Human vessel," they said. Its voice was deep and rumbling. "You have entered the territory of the Empire. State your purpose or be destroyed." Danny stepped forward and spoke clearly. "We are the diplomatic vessel Starward Hope from the planet Earth. We come in peace, seeking trade and mutual cooperation between our peoples." They made a sound that might have been laughter. Peace, trade, cooperation. These are words for the weak. The Empire does not negotiate with species that have not proven their worth. "And how does a species prove its worth?" Danny asked. "Through combat," they replied. "Single combat between champions. If your champion defeats ours, we will consider your request. If your champion loses, your ship and everyone on it becomes property of the Empire." The bridge fell silent. Danny could hear the soft hum of the ship's systems and nothing else. Everyone was looking at him, waiting for his response. "We accept," he said. Commander Grant, the senior diplomatic officer, grabbed Danny's arm. "Captain, we can't agree to this. We have no warriors on this ship. We have scientists and ambassadors. They are known throughout the sector as the most dangerous fighters in existence." "If we run, they chase us," Danny said quietly. "Their ships are faster than ours. If we fight as a ship, they destroy us. Their weapons are stronger than ours. This is our only chance. One person fights instead of everyone dying." "Then let me find someone," pleaded. "We have some security officers. We have people who have trained in combat." Danny shook his head. "No, I'll do it myself." "Danny, that's suicide." "Maybe," Danny admitted. "But I've been fighting my whole life. I fought in the Pacific Wars. I fought in the European conflict. I know what it means to face an enemy that's bigger and stronger than me. I've done it before." He turned back to the screen where there was still waiting. "I am Captain Danny Marsh. I will be humanity's champion." They studied him for a long moment. You are small, you are old. You have only 2 arms. Are you certain this is your choice, human? There will be no changing your mind once you arrive." "I'm certain." "Very well, dock your vessel at Platform 7. The combat will take place in 3 hours. Prepare yourself, human. You face Princess N, the greatest warrior our empire has ever produced." The screen went dark. Laura Price, the ship's chief medical officer, was the first to speak. She was a woman in her late 30s with gentle hands and worried eyes. "Danny, I need to talk to you. Now." She pulled him aside into the medical bay. The room was small and white, filled with equipment that hummed softly. "I've been reading the files on physiology," Laura said. "They're incredible fighters, 4 arms, each one with independent muscle control. Their reaction time is 3 times faster than ours. Their bones are denser than titanium. Their scales can stop a knife blade. Danny, I don't see how any human can survive a fight with one of them." Danny sat down on one of the beds. He looked tired but not afraid. "I know, I've read the same files." "Then why are you doing this?" He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "When I was 19, I was stationed in a small village during the Pacific Wars. The enemy had us surrounded. They had more soldiers, more weapons, more everything. My commanding officer wanted to surrender. He said we had no chance." "What happened?" "I didn't surrender," Danny said simply. "I found a way. I always find a way. That's what humans do, Laura. We find ways, we adapt, we survive. It's what we've been doing for 100,000 years." Laura looked at him with something between admiration and sadness. "You really believe you can do this?" "I believe I have to try. If I don't, everyone on this ship dies or becomes a slave. If I fight, maybe I lose, but maybe I don't. And even if I do lose, maybe I show them something. Maybe I show them that humans don't give up. Maybe that means something." She handed him a small device. "This is a medical scanner. I've programmed it with everything we know about anatomy. Their nerve clusters, their weak points, their pressure areas. It's not much, but it might help." Danny took the device and slipped it into his pocket. "Thank you, Laura." 3 hours later, Danny Marsh walked through the massive doors of the arena. The stadium was enormous, larger than any sports venue on Earth. Thousands sat in the stands, their yellow eyes fixed on the small human walking across the sand. And there in the center of the arena stood Princess N. She was everything the stories said and more. 8 feet of blue-scaled muscle and power. 4 arms that ended in claws sharp enough to tear through armor. Eyes that burned with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. She looked down at Danny and smiled. It was not a kind smile. "You're no match for me, human," she said, her voice echoing through the Colosseum. "Your species is soft. You lack claws. You lack fangs. You lack natural armor. You have only 2 arms and a body made of weak flesh. What could you possibly offer in combat?" Danny looked up at her. He did not smile. He did not frown. His face was calm and unreadable. "I guess we'll find out," he said. The crowd roared with laughter. The princess spread her 4 arms wide and flexed her claws. "Yes," she said, "we will." And the drums began to beat, signaling the start of the fight that would change everything. The drums beat 3 times and then fell silent. The crowd of thousands held their breath. Every yellow eye in the arena was fixed on the 2 figures standing in the center of the sand. Princess N stood like a statue of war. Her 4 arms were loose at her sides, her claws extended. Her blue scales caught the light from the floating orbs above and made her skin shine like polished metal. She had fought in this arena many times before. She knew every grain of sand, every shadow, every sound the crowd made. Across from her, Danny Marsh stood very still. He had removed his uniform jacket and stood in just his undershirt and trousers. His arms were at his sides. His feet were planted firmly on the ground. He was watching her the way a hunter watches dangerous prey. An elder stood at the edge of the arena. He raised his arms and spoke in a voice that carried across the whole stadium. "The rules are simple. 3 rounds of combat. No weapons except what nature has provided. The fight continues until one warrior cannot stand, surrenders, or dies. May the strongest prevail." The elder dropped his arms. and moved. She crossed the distance between them in less than a heartbeat. Her speed was incredible, faster than anything Danny had ever seen. Her lower two arms swept low, aiming for his legs. Her upper two arms struck high, going for his head and chest. It was a technique called the 4 points, and it had ended over 200 of her previous fights in the first few seconds. But Danny was not there. He had moved at the exact moment she attacked. Not faster than her, because no human could be faster than I, but earlier. He had read her body. He had seen her weight shift. He had noticed her muscles tense before she moved, and he had simply stepped to the side. N's claws cut through empty air. She stumbled forward, carried by her own speed, and nearly fell. The crowd went silent. For one long moment, no one moved. No one breathed. This had never happened before. No opponent had ever avoided the 4 points. N turned around slowly. Her yellow eyes were wide with surprise. She looked at the human standing calmly a few feet away, and for the first time she felt something she did not recognize. Confusion. "Lucky," she growled. "You were lucky." Danny did not respond. He simply watched her, his brown eyes calm and patient. She attacked again. This time she was more careful. She came at him with a series of quick strikes, using all 4 arms in a complex pattern that had taken her decades to master. Each strike was fast enough to break stone. Each claw was sharp enough to cut steel. Danny moved like water. He ducked under one arm, stepped around another, twisted away from a third. He was not trying to block her attacks because he knew he could not. Her arms were too strong. One direct hit would shatter his bones. So instead, he avoided them. He read her movements, and he was never where her strikes landed. But he was not perfect. One of her claws caught his shoulder. It was just a glancing blow, but it tore through his shirt and opened a long cut in his flesh. Blood began to run down his arm. The crowd cheered. They could smell the blood. They knew it was only a matter of time now. But Danny did not fall. He did not cry out. He simply adjusted his stance and kept moving. Another strike caught his side. Then another hit his thigh. Each one drew blood. Each one would have made a normal opponent collapse. But Danny stayed on his feet. He kept watching. He kept learning. Up in the viewing area reserved for the human delegation, Amy Cole gripped the railing with white knuckles. "He's getting torn apart," she whispered. Ben stood beside her, his face pale. "No, look at his eyes. He's not panicking, he's studying her." "Studying her? Ben, he's bleeding from a dozen wounds." "I know, but watch how he moves. Each time she attacks, he gets a little better at avoiding her. He's learning her patterns. He's figuring out her timing." Laura Price joined them, her medical scanner in her hand. "His vital signs are holding. He's in pain, but he's managing it. Danny's always been good at managing pain." Grant, the diplomatic commander, shook his head slowly. "I've never seen anything like this. He's not trying to win. He's trying to survive long enough to understand her." "That's insane," Amy said. "That's Danny," Laura replied quietly. Down in the arena, the first round was reaching its end. N was breathing hard, not from exhaustion because could fight for hours without tiring. She was breathing hard from frustration. Every attack she made should have ended the fight. Every strike should have killed this weak, slow, fragile human. But he kept moving. He kept dodging. He kept getting back up. And those calm brown eyes never stopped watching her. The drums beat again, signaling the end of the first round. Both fighters returned to their corners of the arena. Servants brought water and towels to the princess. Danny had no servants. He simply stood alone, pressing his hand against the worst of his wounds to slow the bleeding. N stared at him from across the sand. In 300 fights, she had never failed to defeat an opponent in the first round. Most of them had not lasted more than a few seconds. This human had survived the entire round. "Princess," one of her advisors said, approaching carefully, "the human is wounded. He cannot last much longer. The second round will finish him." Yes, N said slowly, it should. But there was doubt in her voice. For the first time in her life, there was doubt. In his corner, Danny checked his injuries. 3 deep cuts on his chest, 2 on his arms, 1 on his leg. He was losing blood, but not too quickly. He could survive another round, maybe 2. The question was whether that would be enough. He thought about what Laura had told him before the fight. The scanner she had given him was in his pocket, but he had not needed it yet. He had been too busy surviving to look for weakness. But he had learned something during the first round. N was fast, incredibly fast, but she was also predictable. She attacked in patterns. Her lower arms always moved first, trying to take out his legs. Then her upper arms followed, going for the killing blow. She relied on her speed and strength to end fights quickly. She was not used to opponents who could avoid her attacks. And there was something else, something about the way she moved. Her upper right arm was slightly slower than the others, not by much, just a fraction of a second. But in combat, a fraction of a second was everything. Danny filed this information away in his mind. He did not know if he could use it. He did not know if he would survive long enough to try, but he would keep watching. He would keep learning. That was what humans did. They learned. They adapted. They found ways to survive against creatures bigger and stronger and faster than themselves. 100,000 years ago, his ancestors had faced lions and wolves and bears with nothing but rocks and sticks. They had survived because they learned, because they never gave up, because they refused to accept that the fight was over until their hearts stopped beating. Danny Marsh was not going to be the one who broke that chain. The drums beat again. The second round was about to begin. Across the arena, N rose to her full height. She cracked her neck and flexed all 4 arms. The crowd roared with excitement. They knew the human could not survive another round. They knew the princess would finish him this time. Danny took a deep breath and walked back to the center of the arena. His wounds ached. His muscles burned. His body wanted to collapse and never move again. But his mind was clear, his heart was steady, and his eyes were still watching. "You surprised me in the first round," N said as they faced each other again. "It will not happen again." Danny said nothing. He simply raised his fists and waited. The drums fell silent, and the fight continued. The second round began with fire. N did not hold back this time. She attacked with everything she had. Her 4 arms became a blur of motion, striking from every angle at once. She used techniques she had not used in decades, complex combinations that she had saved for the most dangerous opponents. But Danny was ready. He had spent the first round learning her patterns. He knew how she moved. He knew when she shifted her weight before an attack. He knew which arm would come first and which would follow. He was not faster than her. He never would be. But he knew where her strikes would land before they arrived. He ducked under a claw aimed at his throat. He stepped around a sweeping blow that would have taken off his legs. He twisted away from a jab that could have crushed his skull. And as he moved, he got closer. N felt something she had never felt in combat before: pressure. This tiny human was pressing forward, slipping through her attacks like water through her fingers. She increased her speed. She changed her patterns, but nothing worked. He kept coming. Danny reached into his pocket and felt the medical scanner Laura had given him. During the break, he had looked at the information stored inside. He had found something: a nerve cluster on the upper right arm, a weak point in anatomy. If struck correctly, it would temporarily paralyze the arm. He waited for his moment. N's upper right arm came at him in a stabbing motion. Danny saw it coming. He had been watching for it. At the last possible moment, he twisted his body and struck with his elbow. The blow landed perfectly on the nerve cluster. N screamed, not in pain but in shock. Her upper right arm went limp at her side, hanging uselessly like a dead branch. She stared at it with wide yellow eyes, unable to believe what had happened. The crowd fell completely silent. In 300 fights, no opponent had ever wounded Princess N. No opponent had ever found a weakness in her defenses. No opponent had ever made her scream. Until now. How? She demanded, clutching her numb arm. How did you know about that nerve cluster? It's not common knowledge. It's a secret of anatomy. Danny was breathing hard. His wounds were bleeding again. His body was shaking from exhaustion. But there was something in his eyes that had not been there before. Hope. We studied your species, he said simply. We learn it's what we do. N stared at him. Something was changing inside her. The confidence that had carried her through 300 victories was cracking. She had always believed that combat was about strength and speed and skill. She had always believed that the strongest warrior would win. But this human was showing her something different. He was showing her that knowledge was a weapon too. That learning was a form of power. That a creature did not need claws or scales or forearms to be dangerous. She looked at him with new eyes, really looked at him for the first time. He was covered in blood, most of it his own. His body was broken in a dozen places. By all logic, he should have collapsed long ago, but he was still standing, still fighting, still watching her with those calm brown eyes. Why do you continue? She asked, her voice quieter now. You must know you cannot win. Even with one arm disabled, I am still stronger and faster than you. You cannot defeat me. Danny wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. Maybe not, but I can show you something. Show me what? What humans are capable of. Before she could respond, the drums beat to signal the end of the second round. Both fighters retreated to their corners. Healers rushed to their princess, pressing devices against her arm to restore feeling. Within minutes, her arm was working again. But the damage had been done, not to her body but to her mind. N sat alone during the break. She dismissed her advisors and her servants. She needed to think. She used her personal terminal to access the archives. She searched for everything they had on humanity. Most of it was dismissive, weak species, no natural weapons, short, fragile bodies, not a threat. But as she dug deeper, she found other information. Information that made her scales prickle with unease. Humans were persistent predators. On their home world, they had hunted by chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They could run for hours without stopping. They could travel hundreds of miles on foot without rest. They were not fast or strong, but they never stopped. They never gave up. And there was more. Humans had something called adrenaline. When they were in danger, their bodies released chemicals that made them temporarily stronger, faster, and more resistant to pain. They could push past injuries that would stop other species. They could fight through damage that should have killed them. There was a human saying in the archives, fight or flight. It described how humans responded to danger, but the archives noted something strange. Humans often chose to fight even when flight was the logical choice. They fought against odds that made no sense. They fought when they had no chance of winning. And sometimes, against all logic, they won. N closed the terminal and sat in silence. She thought about the human standing across the arena, Danny Marsh, a small, aging male from a species that should have been nothing special, a creature with 2 arms and fragile skin and no claws or scales. And yet he had done something that no one in 300 fights had ever done. He had made her question herself. In the human viewing area, the mood was tense but hopeful. He actually hurt her, Amy said, her voice full of wonder. I didn't think it was possible. Danny's always been resourceful, Laura said. She was watching her medical scanner with worried eyes. But his injuries are serious. Internal bleeding, cracked ribs, multiple lacerations. He's running on pure willpower at this point. Grant was packing back and forth. Can he survive another round? Medically speaking, he shouldn't have survived the first one. Then how is he still standing? Laura looked through the viewing window at the small figure bleeding in the arena below. Because he's Danny Marsh, and Danny Marsh doesn't know how to quit. Ben was studying the crowd. Look at he said quietly. They're not cheering anymore. They're not laughing. They're watching. He was right. The thousands in the stands were sitting in stunned silence. They had come to see their princess crush another weak alien. They had expected entertainment. Instead, they were witnessing something they had never seen before. A human who would not fall. Down in the arena, Danny was trying to slow his breathing. His heart was pounding. Every part of his body was screaming at him to stop, to surrender, to let it be over. But he thought about the people on his ship. He thought about Amy and Ben and Laura, and he thought about everyone who was counting on him. If he lost, they would all become slaves. If he quit, their lives were over. He could not let that happen. He looked across the arena at N. She was watching him too, and for the first time he saw something in her eyes that gave him strength. Doubt. The mighty princess, the undefeated warrior, the greatest fighter in the empire, was looking at a broken, bleeding human and seeing something that scared her. Not his strength, not his speed, not his skill. His refusal to give up. The drums began to beat again. The third and final round was about to begin. Danny pushed himself to his feet. His legs were shaking. His vision was starting to blur at the edges. He did not know if he could survive another round. He did not know if his body would hold together long enough to keep fighting. But he knew one thing for certain. He was not going to surrender. Not now, not ever, not while there was still breath in his lungs and blood in his veins. He walked slowly back to the center of the arena. Each step was agony. Each movement sent new waves of pain through his battered body. But he walked because that was what humans did. They kept walking no matter what. The third round began differently than the others. N did not attack immediately. She stood in the center of the arena, her 4 arms at her sides, and watched the human approach. Danny walked slowly, each step careful and measured. He was saving his energy. He knew he did not have much left. They faced each other in silence. The crowd waited. The drums had stopped. The only sound was the soft whisper of sand shifting beneath their feet. Before we continue, N said, I want to understand something. Danny raised an eyebrow but said nothing. You are dying, she continued. I can see it. Your body is failing. Your wounds are too severe. Even if this fight ended right now, you might not survive the night. And yet you refuse to surrender. Why? Danny thought about the question. He thought about his ship and his crew. He thought about Earth, millions of light years away. He thought about everyone who had ever told him something was impossible. Because that's not who I am, he said finally. That's not who we are. Who are you? Humans. He said the word simply, without pride or anger, just stating a fact. We don't surrender, we don't give up. We don't stop fighting until we have nothing left, and even then we find more. But why? N pressed. What is the purpose of fighting when you cannot win? Danny smiled. It was a tired smile, full of pain but real. Who says I can't win? Something in those words made N's scales prickle. There was no logic in his confidence. He was smaller, weaker, slower, and badly wounded. By every measure, he should have been easy to defeat. But there was something in his eyes, something in the way he stood, that made her uncertain. She had never faced an opponent like this. She had faced warriors with greater strength. She had faced fighters with faster reflexes. She had faced enemies with more deadly natural weapons. But she had never faced someone who simply refused to accept defeat. Very well, she said. Let us finish this. She attacked. This time, Danny did not try to avoid all of her strikes. He knew he was too weak, too slow. Instead, he chose which blows to take and which to dodge. He let her claws rake across his back because it left her upper right arm extended. He accepted a strike to his ribs because it brought him inside her reach. He was trading damage for position. It was a desperate strategy, but it was all he had left. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the human moved closer and closer to their princess. He was covered in blood now. His shirt was in tatters. Deep gashes marked his chest, his arms, his legs. He looked like he should have been dead 3 times over. But he kept moving forward. En struck him in the chest with all the power of her lower left arm. Danny flew backward, hitting the sand hard. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. His ribs cracked. He could taste blood in his mouth. The crowd began to cheer. Finally, the human was down. Finally, the fight was over. But Danny stood up. He rose slowly, painfully, his body shaking with the effort. Blood dripped from his wounds and stained the sand beneath his feet. His breathing was ragged and harsh, but he stood. En stared at him with something approaching awe. "How," she whispered, "how are you still standing?" Danny spat blood and raised his fists again. "I told you, we don't know how to quit." She hit him again. Another devastating blow that sent him flying. He hit the wall of the arena with a sickening crash and slumped to the ground. The crowd held their breath. Danny stood up. It took longer this time. His movements were slow and unsteady. One of his arms hung at a strange angle, probably broken. His left eye was swelling shut, but he stood. En felt something cracking inside her, not her bones or her scales, something deeper, something that had never been touched before. Her certainty. She had been raised to believe that the strongest warrior always won. She had been taught that victory came from power and skill and natural gifts. She had built her entire identity around being undefeated, unmatched, unstoppable. But this human was showing her something her entire culture had missed. Strength was not just about muscles and claws and speed. Strength was about something deeper, something inside, something that had nothing to do with how many arms you had or how hard you could hit. Danny walked toward her again. His steps were uneven. He was leaving a trail of blood on the sand. Every breath seemed to cause him pain, but he kept walking. "Stay down," En said. Her voice was strange, almost pleading. "Just stay down. There is no shame in defeat against a superior opponent." "You're right," Danny said. "There isn't." He kept walking. "But I'm not defeated yet." In the viewing area, Laura was crying. Amy had her hand over her mouth. Ben was gripping the railing so hard his knuckles were white, was standing perfectly still, unable to look away. "He's going to die," Laura whispered. "If she hits him again, he's going to die." "Then why won't he stop?" Amy asked. Answered without looking at her. "Because if he stops, we all die. Because if he gives up, every human on that ship becomes a slave. Because Danny would rather die on his feet than live on his knees." He paused and added quietly, "That's what makes us human." Down in the arena, Danny had reached in again. He stood before her, broken and bleeding, barely able to keep his balance. His one good eye looked up at her face, 8 feet above his own. "Your move, princess," he said. En raised all 4 of her arms. The crowd leaned forward. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the final blow, the killing strike that would end this strange, impossible fight. But something was wrong. Her arms were shaking. Not from exhaustion, could fight for days without tiring, not from injury. The nerve damage from earlier had been healed. Her arms were shaking because, for the first time in her life, she did not want to strike. She looked at this human, this small, fragile creature who had refused to accept defeat, and she felt something she had never felt in 300 fights. Respect. Not the respect of one warrior acknowledging another's skill, not the respect of a victor for a worthy opponent. Something deeper, something that touched a part of her soul she had not known existed. He had shown her something about the nature of strength, something her entire species had forgotten in their 10,000 generations of breeding for combat, something that had nothing to do with claws or scales or 4 arms. True strength was not about what you could destroy. True strength was about what you refused to surrender. She looked at him standing there, this broken human who should have been easy to defeat. She saw the blood running down his face, the wounds that would take months to heal, the body that was moments away from collapse. And she saw his eyes. Those calm brown eyes that had watched her throughout the fight. Those eyes that had never shown fear, never shown despair, never shown anything except quiet determination. Those eyes that were still watching her now, waiting for her next move. Anne made her choice. She lowered her arms. The arena fell completely silent. Thousands of sat frozen in their seats, unable to believe what they were seeing. Princess N, the greatest warrior their empire had ever produced, was lowering her arms. She was not attacking. She was not finishing the fight. She was stopping. One of the arena masters stepped forward, confusion written on his scaled face. "Princess, the fight is not over. The human still stands. You must finish him." N did not look at him. Her yellow eyes were fixed on Danny, on this broken and bleeding human who had refused to fall. "I yield," she said. Her voice was clear and strong. It echoed across the silent arena like thunder. "I yield." The crowd erupted into chaos, jumped to their feet shouting and roaring. Some were angry, some were confused, some were simply in shock. In the entire history of the Empire, no champion had ever yielded in the arena. It was not done. It was not possible. But N was doing it. She walked toward Danny slowly. He watched her approach, too exhausted to move, too stubborn to fall. His body was screaming at him to collapse, to finally let go, but something in her eyes made him wait. She stopped in front of him. Then, slowly and deliberately, she dropped to one knee. The crowd went silent again. A princess was kneeling before a human, before a creature they had dismissed as weak and inferior, before someone who should have been nothing more than easy prey. "I was wrong," N said. Her voice carried across the arena. "You are not without weapons, human. Your weapon is your spirit. Your weapon is your refusal to accept defeat." She rose to her feet and turned to face the crowd. When she spoke again, her voice was commanding and certain. "I have faced warriors with greater strength than this human. I have faced fighters with faster reflexes and more deadly natural weapons. I have faced opponents who seemed invincible, and I have defeated them all." She paused and looked back at Danny. "But I have never faced an opponent who simply would not stop. I have never faced someone whose body was failing but whose spirit remained unbroken. This human taught me something today, something our species forgot long ago." She raised all four of her arms high. "True strength is not about what you can destroy. True strength is about what you refuse to surrender. By that measure, this human is the strongest warrior I have ever faced." The arena was silent. Even the most outraged had stopped shouting. They were listening, truly listening to their princess speak. "The humans have proven their worth," N declared. "They will receive full diplomatic status and trading rights with the Empire. Any who disagree with this decision may challenge me in single combat." She looked around the arena, her yellow eyes blazing with challenge. No one moved. No one spoke. No one dared to challenge the princess who had just shown them a new definition of strength. Danny's knees finally gave out. He fell forward, his battered body finally surrendering to exhaustion. But before he hit the ground, four strong arms caught him. N held the unconscious human carefully, almost gently. She looked at his face, peaceful now in sleep, and felt something she had never experienced before. "Friendship. Get the human medical team," she commanded. "This warrior has earned the finest care we can provide." 2 hours later, Danny Marsh woke up in the medical bay of the Starboard Hope. The first thing he saw was Laura's face, tired but smiling, hovering over him. Behind her, he could see the rest of the senior staff gathered around his bed. "Did it work?" he asked, His voice was weak and hoarse. Grant stepped forward. There were tears in his eyes. "It worked, Danny. We have our alliance, full diplomatic status and trading rights. They have agreed to everything." Danny tried to sit up, but Laura gently pushed him back down. "You have 12 broken bones, internal bleeding in 3 organs, and more cuts than I can count," she said firmly. "You're not going anywhere for at least a month." "A month? Maybe 2. That was the most reckless, dangerous, foolish thing I have ever seen anyone do." She paused and squeezed his hand. "It was also the bravest." Amy Cole was standing near the door, watching silently. She had thought she understood what it meant to be human. She had thought she knew what courage looked like. But watching Danny in that arena had shown her something new, something that made her proud to belong to the same species. Ben was already working on his report. He would tell the story of what happened here. He would make sure that everyone back on Earth knew about Captain Danny Marsh, the man who had faced an impossible enemy and refused to give up. Was thinking about the future. This alliance would change everything. The Empire was powerful and vast. With their help, humanity could explore further than ever before. They could build new colonies, discover new worlds, reach for stars that had always seemed impossibly distant. And it had all started because one man refused to quit. The door to the medical bay opened, and a tall figure stepped inside. N had to duck to fit through the human-sized doorway. She approached Danny's bed slowly, aware of how the other humans were watching her. "I came to see how you were recovering," she said. Danny managed a weak smile. "I've felt better, but I've also felt worse." "When have you felt worse than this?" "Boot camp." N made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Your species is very strange, Danny Marsh." "So I've been told." She was quiet for a moment, then spoke again. "I want you to know something. In my entire life, I have never yielded in combat. I have never met anyone who made me question my beliefs about strength and power. You changed something in me today. I do not fully understand it yet, but I know that I am different now because of you." Danny looked at her with those calm brown eyes that had watched her throughout the fight. "Maybe that's the point," he said. "Maybe the point of meeting new species isn't to conquer them or defeat them. Maybe it's to learn from each other, to change each other, to become something better together than we were apart." N considered his words. They were strange ideas for someone raised in a warrior culture, but they felt right. They felt true. "I would like to learn more about your species," she said. "I would like to understand how you became what you are, how you developed this spirit that refuses to break." "I'd be happy to teach you," Danny said, "but it might take a while." "I have time." 6 months later, the first joint human exploration fleet launched into uncharted space. It was the beginning of a new era. 2 species that should have been enemies were now partners. 2 cultures that seemed completely different had found common ground. Captain Danny Marsh stood on the bridge of the fleet's flagship. His body had healed, though he carried new scars that would never fade. Beside him stood Ambassador N, her tall blue form a stark contrast to his shorter human build. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. Danny looked out at the stars waiting ahead of them. Billions of worlds, infinite possibilities, a future that was just beginning. "I've been ready my whole life," he said. The fleet engaged its engines and jumped into hyperspace. Behind them, the home system grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. In the history books of both species, this moment would be remembered as the beginning of the Great Alliance. But for those who were there, it was something simpler. It was proof that the universe rewards those who refuse to surrender. That strength comes in many forms, that the smallest, weakest creature can change everything if their spirit remains unbroken. It was the story of a human who faced an impossible challenge, and won not through power or skill, but through something deeper, something that had carried humanity through 100,000 years of struggle and hardship. the simple refusal to give up. And as the fleet sailed into unknown space, Danny Marsh smiled. Because that was what humans did. They kept going forward, no matter what.